The tension at the Spanish Grand Prix in Barcelona was unlike anything seen in recent memory. Lewis Hamilton, now driving for Ferrari, had just qualified in 5th place. Once again, he found himself behind the dominant McLarens, who had secured yet another front-row lockout. As he stood before the media, Hamilton didn't hold back. His words came out sharply and without any attempt to soften the blow. He said it plainly. What a waste of money. That sentence was the spark that ignited a firestorm throughout the Formula One paddock. Hamilton wasn't just venting about his own team's struggles. He was pointing to a much larger issue, one that had been brewing for months. The FIA's much-discussed technical directive, which was supposed to level the playing field by targeting flexible front wings, had done nothing to change the competitive order. Instead, it had only exposed deeper flaws within the sport and handed McLaren an even greater advantage. When the directive was first announced, teams like Ferrari and Red Bull believed they had an opportunity to clip McLaren's wings, literally and figuratively. The goal was to eliminate the performance advantage McLaren supposedly gained from their flexible wing designs. The FIA stepped in and implemented strict new rules that reduced wing deflection from 15 mm to 10 mm and tightened flat flexibility from 5 mm to 3 mm. This forced every team to redesign their front wings, costing millions and taking up valuable time that could have been spent on performance upgrades. But as Hamilton stood there, frustrated and visibly disappointed, he let the world know that the directive had achieved absolutely nothing. He said everyone's wings still bent, just not as much. Teams had to make new wings, spend more money, and in the end, nothing really changed. The cars felt almost exactly the same. For Hamilton and many others, it was a painful realization that the sport was caught in a cycle of wasteful decision-making. What Hamilton didn't know at that moment was that his words were about to draw sharp criticism from some powerful voices in the sport. One of those was Gunther Steiner, the former Haas team principal, known for his unfiltered opinions and deep understanding of F1 politics. Steiner appeared on the Red Flags podcast shortly after Hamilton's comments and made his stance clear. Hamilton was wrong. According to Steiner, there was no money wasted. He argued that the new flexi-wing regulation applied equally to all teams, and that McLaren had simply done a better job adapting to the new rules. But Steiner didn't stop there. He revealed a truth that many within the paddock had suspected, but never confirmed publicly. McLaren, instead of spending millions redesigning their entire aerodynamic concept, had made a simple, low-cost modification to comply with the new rules. They added a small bracket to the wing that prevented excessive bending. That's it. While teams like Ferrari and Red Bull tore apart their designs and rebuilt their wings from scratch, McLaren had outmaneuvered them with a fix so simple it was almost insulting. Steiner's message was clear. The very teams that had lobbied the FIA to change the rules ended up handing McLaren a bigger advantage. They thought they were hurting McLaren, but they only hurt themselves. McLaren's engineering team, with a clear understanding of their own car, went to the wind tunnel and replicated the old balance with nearly identical results. Even if they lost some flexibility, they could regain 99.8% of the previous performance. That level of precision and preparation put them miles ahead of their competitors. As the dust settled on the Spanish Grand Prix weekend, the evidence of McLaren's dominance was undeniable. Oscar Piastri won from pole position, followed by his teammate Lando Norris. Another McLaren 1-2 finish. Meanwhile, Max Verstappen collided with another driver and dropped to 10th place after a penalty. Hamilton, stuck in 5th, could only watch as the championship slipped further away. In the championship standings, Piastri now led with 146 points, Norris trailed with 133, and Verstappen sat at 124. Ferrari was nearly 200 points behind McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. The season that had started with promise was turning into a McLaren exhibition. Hamilton's anger continued to simmer. He later said that the millions spent on the new wings could have been given to charity. That remark summed up his frustration, not just with Ferrari's underperformance, but with the sport itself. He felt the FIA had lost its way, creating rules that solved nothing and instead deepened the gaps between teams. Hamilton's simulator sessions confirmed what he feared. The new front wing barely changed the car's behavior. A little more oversteer in high-speed corners, but otherwise it felt the same. All that money, all that time wasted. And while Ferrari scrambled to develop an upgraded front wing to arrive later in the season, McLaren had already moved ahead. They didn't just survive the rule change, they thrived. Andrea Stella, McLaren's team principal, wasn't surprised. He admitted the rule change was minor, and always would be. The numbers didn't lie. The regulation was too weak to hurt McLaren, and they knew it. In fact, there's a good chance they welcomed the rule, knowing it would send their rivals on. A wild goose chase. The worst part of it all was the realization that McLaren's competitors had been outsmarted, not outspent. The regulation, which aimed to level the field, had become McLaren's secret weapon. The hunters had become the hunted, and now they were paying the price. Steiner's harshest words were aimed directly at the teams who lobbied for the rule. They complained, but what did they gain? Nothing. They gave McLaren more advantage. That sentence echoed across the paddock. It was the most brutal form of irony. The regulation meant to weaken McLaren ended up fortifying them. Nowhere was this clearer than in the constructors' standings and the race results. McLaren had won 7 of the first 9 races. Their drivers controlled the championship fight. Their car remained the class of the field. All while the other teams burned through their budgets trying to catch up. Every race widened the gap. Every new directive seemed to play into McLaren's hands. Hamilton's outburst would go down in history, not as a complaint, but as a prophetic warning. He had seen the truth before others did. The sport wasn't broken because of a dominant car. It was broken because of how the sport responded to dominance. Instead of closing the gap through better performance, the teams and the FIA chased phantom fixes that only made things worse. The paddock was left reeling. Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes now had to admit that their efforts to hinder McLaren had failed completely. Worse, they had wasted precious resources. In a sport where every millisecond counts and every dollar matters, this was a disaster. The consequences were massive. Development programs were delayed, strategic plans were rewritten, morale inside teams like Ferrari took a hit, and McLaren, they just kept winning. Their engineers didn't need to chase down flexible wings anymore. They had already figured out how to replicate their performance through smarter design and faster decision-making. The rest of the season now seemed like a formality. Unless another team pulled off a miracle, McLaren was set to dominate from start to finish. And the other teams had only themselves to blame. The story of the 2025 season wasn't just about who was fastest. It was about who understood the game. McLaren knew the battlefield better than anyone else. They saw the regulation coming, understood its weaknesses, and played it to perfection. Meanwhile, their rivals made mistake after mistake, confusing noise with progress. Now the rest of the grid is left scrambling. They're months behind in development, their budgets are stretched, their drivers are frustrated, and their chances of winning are slipping away. Hamilton had uncovered a truth that cut deep. It wasn't just about a flexible wing, it was about how the sport had lost its sense of direction. The FIA had tried to impose control, but ended up exposing its own lack of foresight. Teams tried to gain an advantage through politics instead of performance and paid the price. As McLaren continues its march toward a dominant championship, the rest of the grid must reckon with a painful reality. They didn't just get beaten on the track, they got beaten in the boardroom, in the wind tunnel, and in the planning meetings. McLaren's success was built on strategy, clarity, and precision. Their rivals brought confusion, panic, and miscalculation. This season will be remembered for many things: the rise of Piastri,